from a leadership skills perspective, from how you lead people post-pandemic, what do you think are some of the big shifts and big changes that we have to adjust to as leaders as we lead our teams in this new world?
When COVID hit, it was fun to sit back and watch the leadership reactions of organizations. And it was inspiring to see that whether people were good leaders or bad leaders, whether they were effective or ineffective prior to COVID, they all, most of them leaned back on their own humanity, where it was normal for people to pick up the phone and say, are you okay? Is your family okay? We had more patience. If somebody was struggling and their kids were struggling or he had a sick family member, we were okay. We sort of allowed them to take time. And for me, the joy in that was that's just good leadership. It's a shame that it took a pandemic for people to learn how to care about each other. And I really hope that those skills that people used naturally continue after COVID. Sadly, I'm sure a lot of them will forget. A lot of it's just what I consider good leadership ideals happened organically. So another one was, I talk about this idea of the worthy rival. So I don't believe in the sense of competition. We live in a world where there's no such thing as winning business. It doesn't exist, right? Where two organizations who sell basically the same product for basically the same price, basically the same quality, can both be wildly successful simultaneously. There's no winning. And so when companies talk about their competition, to me it doesn't make sense, because competition, a competitor, is another player you want to try and beat, which means you spend too much time focusing on what they're doing, and you spend too much time comparing arbitrary metrics, whether it's profits or revenues or market share or number of properties or number of employees or whatever it is, they're arbitrary. You get to pick what you're making the comparison, and you're all proud of yourself when you win at the end of the year, but the game doesn't end. I prefer the concept of a worthy rival. And a worthy rival is another, they may or may not be in your industry, but it's another player in the game who does one or many things better than you. In other words, their strengths reveal to you your weaknesses. And you can study them, you can be grateful for them, but trying competing against them is pointless. But the whole idea is that the only true competitor in the game of business is yourself. How do we improve what we're doing? And learn from those who do similar things to us rather than trying to beat them. And one of the things that I saw when COVID struck, which I found so fascinating, is everybody was so preoccupied with their own survival that the total number of companies that had any kind of presentation about our competitive threats was zero. Nobody was worried about their competitors because they were just trying to survive. Well, that's correct. That is the right mentality in a good market or a bad market, which is how do we, even if times are good, how do we survive for 50, 100, 150 years rather than how do we maximize this year and then blow all the wealth at the end of the year, So some of those things that COVID sort of revealed are really good leadership skills that I hope stay way beyond COVID.
Yeah. And so what are some of the, what are some of the changes that companies need to make to have this less competitive approach and more, I guess it's what you write about in the Infinite Game, right?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Like, how does a leadership team like this think about, well, how do we focus on what we can do better versus how we can beat our competitors?
Right. Well, as I said before, you can pick your own worthy rivals. You can pick any company for any reason and say they're better than us. What can we learn from them? I'll give you a real life story that really captured this for me, and it's in the book, but I'll tell it to you. I spoke at a education summit for Microsoft, and then a few months later I was invited to speak at an education summit for Apple. At the Microsoft Summit, this is back in the Steve Ballmer days, in the Microsoft Summit, the vast majority of the presentations by the executives spent most of their time talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple Summit, 100% of the presentations were how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with beating their competition, the other one was obsessed with advancing their mission. At the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the Zune when it was a thing. This was Microsoft's response to the iPod. And this little piece of technology, I have to say, was really very, very good. It was quite a good little piece of technology. It didn't work on an Apple, so I couldn't use it. That's a different problem. But it was very good. So at the end of my Apple talk, I was sharing a taxi with an Apple executive, and I couldn't help myself. I just had to stir the pot. And I turned to him, I go, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune, and it is so much better than my iPod Touch. And he turned to me and he said, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because he understood, this was an infinite-minded organization, he understood that sometimes your competitor will do something better than you, and sometimes you'll be better than them. There's no such thing as winning or losing. There's only ahead and behind. And where Microsoft was obsessed with beating Apple, Apple was obsessed with outdoing itself. And so the great irony is just a couple years after that, Apple released the iPhone. So where Microsoft was obsessing with how to make a better iPod, Apple was on to the next thing, didn't even care. And that's the whole idea, which is absolutely study and learn from the other players. You see, I don't even call them competitors. The other players in your industry. See what they're doing better. Like I said, it reveals your weaknesses in ourselves. Grow. Eventually, they no longer become worthy of comparison anymore because you advance yourselves. But the whole idea is Apple was thinking about what they could do next, not how they could beat Microsoft to get more market share for an iPod.
So learn from others and how you can be better.
Absolutely. Like I said, their strengths reveal to your weaknesses, and that's a gift.
So let's switch topic, and we're amongst friends here, so we can be fully transparent.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the areas of opportunity that we have when we look at our employee engagement surveys is, and it's surprising to me because of our culture,
mm-hmm.
is trust.
Mm-hmm.
And especially at the mid-management level, and you know, we had conversation about this, but you talk a lot about trust and the importance of trust
mm-hmm.
and it's surprising to me because of our culture,
mm-hmm.
is trust.
Mm-hmm.
And especially at the mid-management level, and you know, we had conversation about this, but you talk a lot about trust and the importance of trust
mm-hmm.
within organizations. And I think that, you know, I'm super proud of, you know, the culture that we have
mm-hmm.
that goes way back. Mr. Sharp was talking about, you know, the golden rule well before anybody wrote about, you know, company cultures. I think we're also very genuine as a company, as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, here we have this opportunity, mm-hmm. right? Especially with our kind of, you know, hourly employee, line employees.
Mm-hmm.
Any advice for us in terms of, you know, what we could think about doing differently?
So we have to remember trust is a feeling, right? It's not a command or an order. You say, trust me. It doesn't work.
Trust me.
It's like a used car dealer. It's a feeling, and that feeling comes from people feeling psychologically safe. You know, I use the story of Noah to help tell this, which is, you know, managers, not just his managers, stop by to say, are you okay? Is there anything you need? On a regular basis. And he said it himself versus Caesar's Palace. He says, only at the Four Seasons do I feel I can be myself. His charming, funny, you know, quirky self. That the Four Seasons, one of the things that I love about you is, you know, when you get into luxury hospitality, it starts to feel like putting on white gloves, and it starts to feel tight, you know? And your definition of luxury is the opposite, which is it's much more human. And you allow for people not to follow a script, but you allow them to be themselves and interpret what it means to care their own way, which I absolutely love. The hardest part about it, and this time is more difficult now than ever before, because people are psychologically burnt out. People are exhausted. People are uncertain. Anxiety is an all-time high. And young people who are coming into the workforce who've never really had a job before they have an expectation that is almost impossible to reach. So, for example, if you go back to like the 1950s or the 1960s, we got our sense of purpose from church. We got our sense of community from bowling league. We got our sense of, we had barbecues on the weekends with our neighbors. And work was loyal to us, and we were loyal to work. We worked there until we got a gold watch. But work was primarily a place that we got money to pay our bills. There's an entire generation now who, when I talk about the gold watch, they don't know what I'm talking about. Like, there is no such thing anymore between loyalty from a company or loyalty to a company. And we can thank Jack Welch for that, for 30 years of destroying that kind of thinking. It's true. I've made it my career to undo everything he did. And now, church attendance is way down. There's no such thing as bowling leagues anymore. We don't really know who our neighbors are. And so we're looking to work to provide all these things for us. We're looking to work that you have to give me a sense of purpose, you have to give me a sense of community, this is where my social life has to be. Now, you have to agree with all of my politics as well. And the newest one, that's really since COVID, you have to be my place for therapy as well, right? And much like the unreasonable expectations people are putting on romantic partners, like, no one can live up to the standard that you're hoping from me. I think that the standard that especially young people are putting on the expectations on a place of employment, on a work family, are impossible for any company to meet. And we've seen it in our company, and I've seen it in other companies as well, where, for example, and again, particularly young people, but not exclusively, because the stress is high. And remember, the way work used to work, and it's slightly different for you because it's still mostly in person, but the way work used to work, which is you go to work, and then after work you go out with your friends and you complain about work, right? Which is totally healthy, by the way. Bitching and moaning about your boss is totally fine, and that venting is totally fine, right? You have a safe space to let it out. But we didn't get the opportunity to go out with our friends. That was taken away from us. Right? And so we went to work, whether in your business in person or but then we didn't go to the bar or the pub afterwards, or we didn't go out for dinner afterwards. We had no outlet for the stress. And so what we did was, because we're spending most of our time with people from work, we talk to people at work. And so now you have an increase of venting at work, beyond the usual amount. And especially if you're in a virtual environment, negative narratives or false narratives can swirl up like crazy. And worse, young people in particular, but not exclusively, would find the one or two empathetic ears that they worked with, and they would unload all of their problems, not just complaining about work and my boss, but my relationship is struggling, I'm struggling with my parents, I'm uncertain about the future, the war in Ukraine, George Floyd. It's like on one person venting because that person is empathetic and listens and takes it all in. But the problem is that person is now taking on everybody's stress. And so you have people who are burnt out, not from work. They're burnt out because they have overloaded by everybody else's problems now, because we're expecting work to be our therapy. And so we are in a period, and the good news is we can see some of the patterns. The bad news is, I think we're in such a period of incredible flux that what the future of work looks like is still so uncertain. Like, what does it mean to have a full-time job? Like, we saw this in COVID, I'm doing my work. Nobody cares if I start at 10 or go to 8 or work random hours, go to the vet in the middle. Nobody's really, it's okay. So I'll take a second full-time job. And, why can't, if I'm not letting anybody down and I'm able to maintain the pace, Why can't I do that? And one employer will say, well, you can't do that because we pay your benefits. You're full-time with us. But who says? Like, so the definition of full-time employment is up for grabs, right? I think people are demanding, and you've talked about this, people are demanding more flexibility because they had it. You know, like the Pandora's box is open. No putting the genie back in the bottle. And so, what is the definition of a full-time job? Is up for grabs. I think these things are unresolved, and I think there's an opportunity for any company, but a company like yours, to start to define these things so that other organizations can learn from you. Because the best organizations, we will copy them. You know, just by way of example, the way Airbnb handled its layoffs, they laid off 10% of their employees during COVID. And the way that they handled it was absolutely exquisite, right? You're doing something traumatic, and they were very generous with their packages, more generous than, I know some of the behind the scenes. It was Brian Chesky, the CEO, who pushed for the company to be more generous. But the thing that I found most impressive was the day that the layoffs went into effect. That day, a website went up, airbnb.com/talent, where they put everybody's resume online in a central hub to help them find employment. So they didn't just let them go and give them money. They set them up to help them find employment. And by the way, we rated that website as well. We needed online talent. We needed programmers. We needed those things. We went straight to airbnb.com/talent. The fact that they did that was brilliant because it shows that we care and treat you with dignity even if we have to do the awful thing of asking you to find employment somewhere else. We're going to try our best to, and others will copy them. That's what I mean about setting an example that others will copy.
That was an amazing answer. Wow. I learned a thing or two in here, right? You like that? It was worth the trip. We could stop right here and we'll all be well ahead of where we started.
Well, you're giving me too much credit because I didn't answer your question.
That's okay. I'm used to that. You're not a very good listener, but you are a good talker.
I have a long list of failed relationships that would agree with you. You are in a very difficult and uncomfortable position because I think leadership is more difficult now than it has ever been because you're dealing with human anxiety, you're dealing with human uncertainty, you're dealing with human ambition and human egos, and again, especially young people who think they know what they want and don't, who have certainty and are very outspoken and do not mind going around their boss's boss to come to you. You know, so you're going to be dealing with a 19-year-old saying, "Why am I not given this?" And you're like, "I don't need. Where do you work?" You know. They have no fear of doing that. They also have no fear of quitting. And so we've seen this pattern where, remember, as a young generation, they're actually less equipped to deal with stress than previous generations. And so anxiety is high, and they're very confrontation avoidant. So, for example, we've seen this, where they feel like they deserve a raise, and they don't know how to ask for a raise, and so instead of asking for a raise, they'll just quit. And then sometimes with an email that says, "You don't value me, you don't pay me enough," you're like, we just had to ask. The answer, we love you, you know? So they're not afraid of quitting, but they are afraid of asking for things. Or if they do ask for things, it sometimes comes across very aggressive or accidentally black and white. Like, I've been here 8 months and I would like a 50% raise. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, and the problem is that they're ill-equipped. What they're doing is they're putting you in a yes or no position. So even if you say, here's the plan to get you that over the course of the next 8 months, they take it as a no, because I asked for something black and white. And so one of the things I think there's a huge opportunity for our company is to help people to build in training that helps them with their human skills. I hate the term soft skills. Please, let's never use that term again. You know, we talk about hard skills and soft skills. Those things are opposite. Hard and soft are opposites. They're hard skills, the skills you need to do your job, and human skills, the skills you need to be a better human being. And we want you to excel at both. And we're going to train you to do both. And some of the human skills that are underappreciated and undertrained in this day and age are how to have difficult conversations, how to have an effective confrontation, how to give and receive feedback. And I think we have to train those things so that if we equip them with the skills, and instead of saying, I've been here for 8 months, I want a raise, to say, I've been here for 8 months, I really love it here. My goal is to stay here. I have financial ambitions. Can you help me get on a path to get to this number? Now we can have a conversation, because it's now a continuum rather than a black and white question. But the point is I don't fault them. They lack the skills. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for an organization like yours to teach these young people coping mechanisms, stress relief, the biggest one being how to ask for help. That is the single biggest thing that is lacking at every generation, which is, I am struggling, can you help me? Whether it's personal or professional. That is absolutely lacking. And so we do unhealthy things to help compensate. Social media and other things.
Interesting. That can also inform our learning and development platform, obviously. Okay, we're going to switch topic again, and I wanted to make sure we have some time for Q&A, but those are important topics, and I don't want to stop you because you're obviously very insightful on any topics you bring in. So, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Big topics, something that I think we're, if I were politically correct, I would tell you, oh yeah, we've made great progress and we're working really hard on it, and we have a great plan.
Yeah.
The truth is, you just look around the room, and the reality is, I think we have a long way to go.
Yep.
And it's not for lack of caring, or I think it matters to all of us. We also have a company where we promote from within heavily because that's how we got to where we are today. Yeah. And so, what are others doing? There's many companies that face the same reality that we do. What are other doings that, to your point earlier, that we can learn from? Not competitors. Yeah. But what was it?
Worthy rivals.
Worthy rivals.
Yeah.
That are doing that you say, hey, look at that. This could be a good direction.
Well, I think most importantly, and you seem to be doing this, most importantly is you see it as a journey rather than an event. I think the companies that are doing it wrong view it as an event, which is, we have this issue, we are not as diverse as we need to be, and so let's fix that. Flip a switch, go on a hiring binge, ta-da, right? And the problem is that's not how it works. Which is, this is a journey of making our organization more representative of the general population, and to say we have to do better. Just acknowledging that there is room for improvement, I think, is a big part of it. But obviously, where are you looking to hire? Who are you asking to make recommendations? All of these things matter. I mean, it's literally just opening the aperture. One of the things we have to recognize is we all have an inherent bias, which is we look for people who look like us, and to stop doing that. Also, go to other companies, ask them who's really good. But the fact that you're treating it as a journey that you will never actually, the point is you'll never actually be perfect. It's going to be a striving for the rest of time, because there's three words there. It's diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Belonging comes from your values and your purpose. diversity comes from what it looks like, but inclusion is how people feel.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to hire somebody, but do they feel like they're valued and included and part of the organization? So all of those are strivings. None of those you'll ever be perfect at. None of those you'll ever complete. But it is a game of constant improvement.
So now I'd like to talk about something that you probably don't know much about, but it's okay, I've still asked the question. The purpose and why. So we just, we are on this journey where we've had this amazing culture based on the golden rule, which is all about how we behave, and then we have been, thank you, we've thought about the impact that this can have on the world, and we have socialized our purpose, which I think resonated with everybody in the room, and even resonated with Mr. Sharp. And it was interesting because when Anna and I mentioned it to you, because obviously we wanted to get your perspective, you had nothing to say. You were like, "That's good." And I think
which is unusual for me.
Which is unusual because normally you destroy everybody. So, I mean, in a nice way. So
this is coming from the Air Force.
See, that's what I meant. See, Antoine, it was not a compliment.
It's gonna stick.
All right. So what about it resonated, and what did you feel it was a good purpose?
So, I mean, I have a bias for the word inspire. Inspire, to me, to make that an action rather than a result. To inspire. I love that. Which is, you think it's a standard by which you have to live by, right? Did you inspire someone today?
Yeah.
I have a thing. I've abandoned it lately, but I had 2 fish bowls in my room, and we can calculate. We know the average lifespan. We know our average lifespan. It's whatever the number is, 78 or whatever it is. So you can actually easily calculate the number of months, weeks, or days that you statistically have left on this planet, right? And so I bought a bag of marbles, and one marble represented each week that I have left on the planet. And I filled up the exact number, based on the statistics, in one fishbowl. And it's more inspiring than doomsday. I mean, it's just statistics. Yeah, no. But at the end of every week, I would ask myself, I actually got it down to the day, but at the end of every week, I'd say, was this a week worth living? Did I do something to inspire someone? And it's my own standard. And if the answer is yes, I move it to the other fishbowl. If the answer is no, I throw away the marble because I wasted it, right? And that's why I love the word inspire. I believe it is a standard to live by, and inspiration is how we make other people feel. It's not, did you do something? I did something good today. I gave money to charity. That's not what it is. It's, how did I make someone feel, and did they feel that their life is even better, even for 5 minutes, because of their interaction with me, right? And then genuine care, I think, is the second part of it, right?
Inspire the world to lead with genuine heart.
Right, with genuine heart. And again, I think that sets you up for values. And it's proprietary. I've never heard anybody talk about people talk about innovation and, integrity. Like, those are generic words. But genuine heart is something you can own. And so how do you amplify genuine heart? What are the standards of leading with genuine heart? What does it mean to lead with genuine heart? What are the values that mean that? Are you giving out a genuine heart award, to the person in each property who exemplifies? And by the way to do that is to ask their teammates to vote for them, not come from leadership. Like, who inspires us to lead with genuine heart to the degree that we want to be more like our own colleague? because a peer review is actually more powerful than a review from up on high. Because really we're all working for one person's approval, where a peer review is my team loves me, and we're not angry when somebody wins that award. I deserve that.
Because I voted for him.
Because I voted for him, right. And it sets a standard for the rest of the team. So I think peer review, where we allow our own people to choose who within our group, who within our team, has inspired us to lead with genuine heart. And the irony is they may not be your best individual performer, but they're probably your best natural leaders. It doesn't necessarily always line up with performance.
Very good. Very nice. The other thing yeah, and I do like the fact that it's about inspire the world, not Four Seasons.
Yep.
To your point about the infinite game and wanting to raise the bar for everybody.
Correct.
So I think it also calls out to, to really elevate the conversation and encourage others to do the same.
I mean, you play the infinite game for the good of the game.
Right.
Right? Which is, you're in the hospitality industry for the good of the hospitality industry and for the good of all business. And the best companies, the ones we love and admire, right? They share. It's the ones who are protective, of what because they think it's a competitive advantage. And what they fail to recognize is implementation is the competitive advantage, not the idea itself. Execution is the competitive advantage.
Yeah.
But the ability to share the things you believe in and the things you have figured out for the good of business. Because we don't just believe your employees should be treated well, we believe all employees should be treated well. And if you figured things out, so I'll tell you a story. So Bob Chapman is the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller. It's a company I've written and spoken about quite a lot, especially in my book, Leaders Eat Last.
Great guy.
And you had the opportunity to meet Bob. Bob is one of those unique, remarkable leaders. And the way I met Bob is he'd read Start With Why, and he sent me a letter and saying, I'm building the kind of company that you've written about. And I said, I want to meet you. And so we had lunch in Los Angeles, this famous lunch where we were scheduled for an hour, and we both cleared our schedules and spent the next 3 hours together because we loved each other. And I didn't believe him. I said, I talk about an ideal. It's not realistic. It's a striving. He says, no, I have it. I said, well, I want to see it to believe it. So he picked me up in his plane from New York, and we spent 3 days flying around the country to all these different factories. And it's a manufacturing company, right? This is blue collar, some union, some non-union manufacturing, right? And what I saw absolutely astonished me. It blew me away. I've never seen anything like it. And he didn't prepare anything. He let me roam the factory floor without I could talk to anybody. I could ask anybody any question I wanted. There was no window dressing. And I was absolutely blown away. And I'll just tell you one quick story that really exemplifies. And this one's, I haven't written or spoken about this one. So this one is, I haven't talked about this one. So they have a machine that was getting old. This is a factory, big machine.
Yeah.
That's getting old and need to be replaced. Traditionally, how large machines are replaced is somebody in procurement fills out a list of requirements and then goes in the market to find a machine that fits a budget, right? That's usually how it's done. That's not how they did it. They went to the factory floor, to the two guys who work on that machine, one who's pretty young, in his early 20s, one who's got more experience. Neither of them have college educations. I think one had a GED. And they said to them, you need to replace your machine. You have a budget of $750,000. Go. And these two guys travel around the country looking at new...
And never came back.
Exactly. They now live in Tahiti. They gave him a budget, not the money.
Smart.
They flew around the country. They looked at new and used machines. And the people selling the machines said they'd never seen anything like it. They'd never had anybody show up in overalls climbing in the machine. Usually it's a guy in a suit showing up with a clipboard.
Right.
They ended up spending $650,000, so they were really excited that they saved the company money. and that's their machine, right? I can guarantee that machine will never break down, right? And the trust, and it makes perfect sense, but this is what one of the things that Bob says. Bob says is, we trust people who have college educations who work in a back office, and we don't trust people who don't have college educations. What about their education makes them trustworthy or untrustworthy? He says, I know some pretty dishonest MBAs, and that's one of the things that Bob did. But the point was, I went on this wonderful tour with Bob, and then we finally went back to their corporate headquarters in St. Louis, and the team that had sort of built this culture was sitting around a table, and they were all looking at me like this, going, isn't this amazing? Like, we built what you wrote about. And I sat there and I said, I think you're the most selfish organization I've ever met in my entire life. And they all were sort of stunned that I would say that. I said, look, I think it's amazing what you've built. I think it's absolutely incredible. But how selfish of you that you only offer this kind of thing that you've built for 6,000 people. What about the millions of people who hate their jobs, who don't want to go to work every day? What are you doing for them? And it was from that conversation that Bob opened the doors. They now offer training. They now offer tours. Like Bob he wrote a book about it. He's now on the speaking circuit.
Yeah.
He's out there. He's now a public figure. And he's promoting this new way of leading and this new way of thinking. And that's what I think you have an opportunity to do as well, which is amazing what you do for your people. But think about all the things that you have innovated that would benefit other companies and other people that you can share. Again, the competitive advantage comes in the execution. And the fact that you're the leader, the brand is the lead, right? Think about it. Apple had a 4% market share for computer operating systems. Microsoft had 96%. And yet, Microsoft followed Apple, right? Leader doesn't mean biggest market share, doesn't mean most profitable. Although in this case it does. Leader
results in it. Right?
Yeah, but it's definitely not market share or revenues.
Right.
Leader means other people follow what you do. And if your brand stands for something that people want to copy, and you're leading the way, then clearly you are competing against yourself and not them. But let them compete against you. And I think that the Four Seasons is one of those brands. And I can't think of anyone in hospitality who has ever done that, who's ever reached outside of their own industry that others want to be more like them. Can I ask myself a question?
Please. If anybody thinks I'm in control here, this is just a joke.
Right?
It's fake.
Which leads to a good follow-up question.
Please ask yourself the follow-up question too, because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Which is, if indeed we are to lead others and step outside our own industry, how do we innovate that? How do we do that? I'm glad you asked.
Great question.
Okay, you absolutely have a challenge, and it is a difficult one, right? Which is you are not a new company. In a world that is now digital and data-driven. So let's think about innovation for 2 seconds. For millennia, innovation predominantly meant hardware, right? I made a better printing press. Now, the printing press that we have today is basically the same thing that Gutenberg did. It's a thing that goes like this. It goes faster, sure, but it's basically the same thing, right? The airplane is basically the same physics, right? It's 100% the same physics. But for many, many, many years, innovation meant hardware. And hardware is very expensive, which is why the only organizations that could innovate were governments and large companies, right? Because you could afford to. The computer and the internet completely changed that. The invention of the personal computer And Steve Wozniak, one of the founders of Apple, talked about this. He says, I imagine a day in which an individual could compete against a corporation. The computer allows that, where literally one person can compete against a company. That's incredible. And the speed at which innovation can happen, because innovation in the hardware model is slow and expensive, in the software model, it's fast and cheap, right? So think of your iPhone. The hardware is very expensive. It's over $1,000, which is insane. And when they release it, it actually has software on it that is imperfect. And they know it's imperfect, but they give it to you anyway. And then very quickly, they start fixing it. And the patches start coming out, right? And sometimes it's minor. You don't even see the difference. And sometimes it's major. You get a major overhaul. And eventually, the software gets too big that the hardware can no longer contain it, and then you have to buy a new piece of expensive hardware. And this is the model that old companies have to learn to embrace. And if you look at the companies that are dominating right now, whether it's Netflix, it's still big, it's had its issues, but it's still big. Netflix, which reinvented film and television. Tesla, which is reinventing cars. Amazon, which is reinventing retail. They're all new companies. They're all Facebook, Google, TikTok. They're all data companies. The old style of big innovation, those companies aren't the biggest companies anymore. They used to be, but they're not the biggest companies anymore. It's data. And it's because of their speed at which they can make change. And so the companies that are struggling are the companies that are trying to simply add data to their hardware model. So if we add a flat screen TV to our car, we're innovative. No, 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 no. Tesla built an iPhone. Tesla built an iPhone on wheels. What makes that car remarkable is not that it's an electric car. It's that my 2002 Tesla and my friend's 2019 Tesla do the exact same things because the car can update itself. We have all the same features. It's not the old way where, yeah, I don't have those features. I have last year's model, right? That's gone. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the companies that are challenging and pushing, take a look at. I did this just for comparison's sake. I went on Robinhood, the app to make investments, and I did Fidelity, right? Fidelity looks like it's a bunch of old finance people who said, oh, I guess we have to make a website. And I tried to make a trade on there, and I kid you not, first of all, they locked me out for some reason I couldn't understand. So I was on customer service for half an hour. Finally, when I got in, it took me about 45 minutes to figure out how to make a trade. So over an hour for me to make a trade. Robinhood, downloaded the app. In 5 minutes, I was done. The user experience was astonishing. And the reason is because Fidelity is a financial company that's attempting to go online, and Robinhood is a tech company that happens to be in finance. Your challenge is you're a bricks and mortar company that's attempting to go into data. What if you were to start Four Seasons from scratch today? What if you were a data company that happened to be in hospitality, right? And when you start thinking that way, all of a sudden the ideas start flowing, right? So I'll just give you a few examples that, again, just off the top of my head when you start thinking this way, which is, do you track everything about your guests, right? Like everything they ordered in every one of your hotels, everything they drank or ate out of the minibar. Not that you would use that data, you never sell it because that's your values. You're using it to improve the experience legitimately. It's not what they tell you, right? And imagine that for you wouldn't want to do this for one guest, but imagine you start to see a trend that this guest, they have a long trend, they always have Coca-Cola and a bag of nuts out of the minibar every time, right? So you add more Coca-Cola and more nuts in the minibar, and maybe even leave one out for when they arrive. It's about listening, and you use the data. You're really good at listening, right? Your people are good at listening, but now you're using data to listen. Or and you and I talked about, you said this, that your goal is to get to charging $0 for the minibar. I think you should just charge reasonable prices. You know, I don't think you need to charge nothing.
Non-alcoholic products.
Non-alcoholic products, yeah. It's just like none of us like to be gouged like $14 for a can of Coke and a bag of chips. You know, just make it reasonable.
Yeah.
And then nobody actually cares. But all these little things, learning the intense kind of listening. Yeah. And then you ask yourself, if you have all of this data, now what would you innovate? Now what bricks and mortar or planes or boats or whatever you're doing would you build around all of this information that you own? And like I said, what if you were to start a hotel and hospitality company? What if you were to start a tech company? Because you know this. Equinox is now building hotels. Virgin is now building hotels. You know, you have other people outside are coming in. They're leveraging their brand here. Yeah. So the
fashion brands.
Fashion brands. How do you leverage your brand to go there? And I think of yourself as a tech company that happens to be in hospitality, not the other way around.
Well, the great news is we have a phenomenal new chief commercial officer who's sitting in the room right here, and he's right in front of me, and his eyes must be going like, because this is exactly what you've been talking about.
Because the challenge you're going to have is the same challenge as movies, is the same challenge as television, is the same challenge as publishing, which is they said to themselves, we've been doing this business for 40 years, 50 years. I think we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
How do we add a flat screen to it? How do we put data on it? The problem is, it's an entirely different animal.
Yeah.
You cannot rely on your 30 years of experience, which is very scary when you have 30 years of experience.
Yeah.
You literally have to throw it all out.
So,
beginner's mindset.
Natalie, I think we're up, right? We're done. All right, so...
Sorry.
I know, no, amazing. Are you kidding me? That was incredible. So, Simon Sinek, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. We can go to the public? Okay, so let's do it. We were giving a little more time, because this is great. Thank you. So why don't we, I'm sure there's a few questions in the audience that people would like to ask Simon directly. Yes. Hans.
Hi, Simon.
Yep.
Just a few tips or ideas from you on leadership in a virtual world. So during COVID, we all worked virtually, and now, what's happening now?
Yep.
The office is 5 days a week, 9 to 6. It will probably never happen again.
Yep.
But then if you build a team, you would like to have people around you, you would like to see them. You talk about inspiring via a Zoom call or a Teams call. Not that easy. So what are your views on that?
Sure. So there's multiple ways to do it. Not all of them are healthy, right? Remember, the key word here is flexibility. I think flexibility is here to stay. I don't think we can predict exactly what the future will look like, but flexibility. For example, it used to be you ask permission that next week, can I work from home because my kid's home from school or something. Now, you can email in the morning saying, hey, I'm going to work from home today, and everybody's fine with it. That's here to stay. So the key word is flexibility. How do you build flexibility into the system? Companies that are dictating it, I think, are struggling. You must be at work these days. Versus we would like you to come to work 2 days a week to maintain team culture and team, so you have to come to work 2 days a week. You can pick those days. And some days when we have team meetings, then everybody will come those days. But also easing into it. I think one of the things that a lot of companies that have made mistakes is they went from COVID, times to this is what it's going to be on this date. And I think doing very, very little bits over time, the companies that I've seen make dictations, they only did it for senior leadership, which I think was actually very healthy. Which is, for senior leaders, you must be at work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever days you want, right? Where rank and file, they made no dictates at all, zero. Because to a senior leader, you can say, look, you're a senior leader of this company, there are different and higher expectations of you, And we do expect you to be at work on these days. But instead of making these company-wide dictates to start with senior leadership, let that get a momentum for a few months, and then if you need to bring in other people, you can. But I think the key is, how do you maintain flexibility while you ask people to come back to work?
Great question, Hans. Charlie.
Thank you. Simon, it was great to hear about the insights about loyalty of employees to the employer and how challenging that has become. I think we can all relate to that. So maybe some other thoughts on who's doing that well to inspire or re-inspire that loyalty of employees to employers?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and there's unfortunately very few good answers. We have to take a step back for a minute, right? Remember how young people came up through work, right? Which is the damage that Jack Welch and that model did, excessive weight on shareholder supremacy, judging people only by their performance. The idea of using mass layoffs on an annualized basis to balance the books. In other words, we're profitable, just not as profitable as we promised, so you lose your job, right? Which is insane, a profitable company laying people off, right? But this has become so normalized that this young population has been raised watching their parents and their friends' parents lose their job through no fault of their own. It's not a meritocracy. And so why should they have loyalty to the company? They literally came up in an age where they watched the company have no loyalty to them. And so where people blame this young generation for being disloyal or unloyal, I think they're responding to the game that's been laid. And so the question is, how do we demonstrate loyalty? The companies that I think do it well are the ones that are excessive in their values and their purpose, but they're also extremely honest that they're on a journey. One of the best examples, and if you saw the newspaper today about Patagonia, they are one of the quintessential examples of people who are there for the purpose, and Yves Chenault definitely lives it, and the decisions you can see that he makes embody it. But the company is also wholly imperfect. And they talk about their imperfections, and they talk about the striving. And I think the mistake that a lot of companies make is pretending that they've got everything figured out when clearly we don't. But if they say that we don't understand this or we got this wrong, and here are the lessons we learned and we know what to do next time, that level of honesty, just compare it to a personal relationship. You're not going to do well in your marriage if you keep telling your spouse, I got everything right, and I know what I did wrong, and don't worry. You have to say, I screwed up, and here's what I screwed up, and here's what I've learned. And I think people are just looking to feel that you're honest with them. One of the biggest things is quite weirdly, is how we feel about our own selves as well. As leaders, sometimes we think that we have to be positive all the time so that our people will be positive. The problem is it almost always backfires. I was young in my career, and I had one direct report. Her name was Cynthia. Cynthia made me look good every single day. I worked at a big ad agency. And my habit was to let Cynthia sit in on all of my meetings if she was allowed to, if I could get her in, just to learn, even if she had no responsibility, and in the meeting. And we had a conference call with a senior client. So all the senior creatives, all the senior folks, and I was a young executive there, and Cynthia sat on the side just to listen in. I invited her to listen in. And the call went very badly. And when we hung up the phone, I vented. And I vented to my peers or my bosses, which I could do. And I vented all this anger at this client. And then I look over at Cynthia, I went, oh my God, she just heard me do that. And as we walked out of the office, out of the conference room, I said to her, I'm really sorry. You shouldn't have seen me vent like that. I apologize. And she said, no. I'm so glad. She said, you're always so positive, and yet I'm struggling on this client. I thought it was me. But the fact that you're struggling as well makes me feel that it's not me. and it really solidified our relationship. And so I think for us as leaders, especially coming off of COVID, for us to say, I'm having a hard week, guys, so I may not be as reliable this week. I'm just under a lot of stress, a little bit from home and a little bit from work, so please just be patient with me. Gives people permission to say to us, I'm having a bad week, I'm struggling, and we get to say, how can I help? But when we pretend that we've got everything under control at all times, then we're forcing them to pretend that they're under control, and then we can't help them. Then we can't lead with genuine heart, because we don't know. I have a friend who's a general in the Air Force, the real Air Force, and he talks about mental health. He says, if you break your leg, you go see the leg doctor. If your head is broken, you see the head doctor. He normalizes it. And he leads by example. He doesn't just say, hey, if you're struggling, go see the shrink. He'll say, hey guys, it's been a rough week for me. Between 3 and 4, I'm going to go see the counselor. I'll see you later. He's not doing it for show. He's doing it because he genuinely wants to see the counselor. But the point is he's being very open about it. And I think for young people who want to see us as human, I think for us to reveal those things, I think is a huge part of it.
That's great. Yes.
Do you have time for one more?
Of course.
My question builds on Hans's, which is, many of our teams don't have the option of the flexibility
Sure.
that you talked about because they're, in a property.
Sure.
How do we give some of that flexibility to those folks that, have to be on the floor, have to be at the property?
So ask them, right? Take some of your, who your best and brightest are. You know who the ones who bleed 4 seasons, who love it here, who care. You know who they are. That it's a bell curve. Everybody likes it here, but some people love it here. Take the ones who love it here from the front line. Some of your servers, and say to them, we want to build more flexibility in the system. We know what we know from our 30 years of experience, but we want to know what you would do. So include them in the conversation. Say, give us options of what a more flexible workforce would be like. Don't say you're designing it, because the problem is if you don't implement it exactly as it was asked for. Say, give us input that will help us make a decision. Ask them. Let them help design it, and then give constant status. One of the things that we're learning is, young people, when we ask them for their opinions, if we don't go back and say, we did this, they think that we feel unheard, right? So that line of communication, giving you an update based on this thing that we said we're doing, here's where we stand, and things that we're going to implement that they suggest and not going to implement, to be very crystal clear and give them feedback as to the reasons why, as a learning. So it's not arbitrary, like yes, no. But I would go ask your frontline people, if you would design the perfect job in a flexible workforce, give us some feedback as what it could look like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more.
Right side of the room, just
Sorry,
left side of the room.
somebody's raising their head back there, but I can't see.
Oh, there it is.
Because the lights.
I'm here.
Yes, hi.
Hi. I wanted to see your opinion on where people went. I think when we came out of COVID, we were thinking that people didn't want to come back to hospitality. But then, as we looked at other companies, there's a lack of lawyers, there's a lack of ambulance drivers, there's a lack of everything. So where do you think people went?
That's a great question.
And unemployment is at an all-time low. Like, everybody's quitting their jobs and there's no jobs. And yet everybody's looking to hire. I think a lot of people are, there's a few ways to answer it. First of all, a lot of the jobs that people took during COVID, we make the assumption that they wanted to work for us when they took the job during COVID. in the reality is some people took the job because it was a job during COVID. And in their own minds, it was never supposed to be permanent. You know, maybe some of them fell in love, but as soon as the market opened up, their intention was always to leave. So we can't completely beat ourselves up if we do lose some people. But I think a lot of people are, they're bouncing, they're trying things. I mean, let's be realistic. A lot of young people move back home, so their bills are lower, so they can afford to wait and hang out. I think the gig economy is a real thing, and what Uber and those companies, they built into the vernacular this idea of a gig economy, and I think people really fancy being freelancers, maybe even freelance servers. That I work for 3 hotels because I want to pick up shifts here that suit me.
Beehive.
And what does the gig economy mean in traditional employment? I think that's a big part of it, to be honest. But I think a lot of people are also recognizing that money is less important to them than the relationships and their experiences. And I think people are okay making less. So they may have cut or stabilized their incomes, and they maybe don't have that crazy ambition. The thing that I fear, and we touched upon this before, which is people are less afraid of quitting now, young people are less afraid of quitting, and they're building the gig economy lives for themselves. My fear is that they're going to go from job to job to job. When we were younger, you couldn't quit a job in less than 1 year because it would look bad on your resume, right? Now, 3 months, whatever, goodbye. You know? And my fear is, flash forward 5 years, one of 2 things will definitely happen. An employer will look at you that in 5 years you've had 9 jobs. I'm not going to hire you because I just can't trust that you're going to stick around. And you've had 9 jobs in 5 years. You haven't been around anywhere long enough to go through a cycle of good times and bad times. And so you have no discernible skill set. And my fear is that what feels great now, it's going to have consequences in a few years. And I'm worried about that. And I don't know how to communicate that in a way that is sticky. You know, I'm talking about eating healthy now so you don't get diabetes in 20 years. I mean, you know, it's hard, that's a hard message for people to stick. But I'm worried about that.
That's great. That was amazing. Thank you
everyone.
so much. Tony.
Thank you.